All right, welcome to EMS Office Hours. I am Jim Hoffman,
And I'm Josh Schnapp.
and we are with Marc Hill today. Hey, Marc, how you doing? I think Marc is out
Mark?
again. Marc is out again.
Am I there?
There you go.
Yes.
All right,
Okay.
there we go. All right. So, Marc, I invited you on today. Normally, we do these on Mondays or Tuesdays with Dave, and Dave can't really make it on a Fridays like this. So, I wanted to kind of jump in. I've been seeing you. You've been posting some of your stuff on one of my Facebook pages, the group,
Sure.
the EMT paramedic group there. And I thought it'd be a great idea to have you come on, talk about the book, and give you a little bit more exposure, because I feel like you go in these Facebook groups and stuff, and you don't get as much exposure as you think you're going to get, you know. So I wanted to go ahead and just come on here a little bit and talk about the book, and like sort of like your motivation for it. I know that on the website 2dark30.com,
Yeah.
you talk about how the book is really a great resource for people who are in training, education, and even leadership development. And I thought it was kind of cool because if I'm like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you kind of wrote this book on the level of like sort of telling stories about how to do this, rather than just saying methodologies and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
So I thought that was kind of cool that you did that, kind of becoming a different approach, to that aspect of EMS, right?
Yeah.
I think stories are a great way. This is something I'm going to tell a little secret to the listeners, that I send emails out a lot to people that join my list and all. And most of my emails, I'm not going, go buy this or go watch this video. A lot of times I give a story based on whatever it is I'm trying to get somebody to go look at, right? Because when you tell stories, I think people can connect a lot better than just saying, do this, click here, watch this. If you tell a story based, that's behind it, you really can get people to engage, I think, much
It
more.
gives you context.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So what motivated you to do this, Marc? Were you, sort of tired of the old way of doing things?
Well, it's funny. I don't know how much time you want to spend. I can talk all day. So, here's the thing. I never got into fire and EMS originally.
Oh, really?
No, I taught social studies in middle and high school for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
Prior to getting full-time into fire and EMS. And while I was a teacher and a football coach and track coach, I was doing the volunteer firefighting and EMT at the same time. And my dad was a volunteer firefighter, and so was my grandpa. So I grew up, a lot of times I grew up in the, what we used to call in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the fire hall. I grew up rolling hose and, having my dad tie me up into rescue knots and, hang me from different things, practice that stuff, and throwing candy out at the kids riding on the fire trucks back in the good old days when you could still do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's how I grew up. And when I went to college, my dad's like, well, you're going to go to school and you're going to go and do something. So originally I started in engineering, and math was not my forte. And to offset my bad grades in engineering classes, I was taking social studies classes to, bump my GPA up.
Right, okay.
I had a come into Jesus meeting with my advisor in electrical engineering, and his name was Bob Bonzak. And he sat me down and he's like, Marc, do you want to get out of college? I said, well, yeah, it'd be nice. That's the goal here, right? He's like, you have enough credits, you should go be a teacher. And I'm like, well, I guess okay, I'll go try that too, So I went into that and I taught for 8 years, got my master's degree in education. And I did the volunteer firefighting and EMT on the side, and I really enjoyed that. And I got a lot. Not that teaching wasn't, has its own special thing, but I like doing them both. And I was halfway decent. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I was okay as a teacher, and I was okay as a coach, and I was okay as a firefighter. And the way we have things here in Wisconsin, there was a big budget conundrum that went through, and this is back in 2010. And I ended up getting laid off from my teaching job. They'd made some budget cuts. So I'm like, well, I need to do something. I want to go be a paramedic, because I knew that in order to get a full-time position, at least here in Wisconsin, you need to have a paramedic along with your firefighter. So I went back to school, got my paramedic, and then got hired here where I live in Rib Mountain, and then ended up becoming a fire chief in our neighboring little suburb here. Was their first full-time chief, and then was reduced there, went over to where I am now in the city of Wausau, and I've been here now since then. So because of my educational background, I was kind of, I don't want to say pigeonholed, but I was like the guy. Well, Mark was a teacher. We'll have Mark, teach all the new guys, or all the new people. Well, Mark knows how to teach. He likes teaching. We'll get him over here and do all these things, So, which is fine. I was fine with, I enjoyed it. That was fine. It wasn't. I didn't see it. A lot of people, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I wrote the book too, is that a lot of people see having to be the the field training officer, the preceptor, whatever, word you want to use to be the, the trainer.
Right.
A lot of people see it as like, oh, I got to be the FTO for this, this new person for the next, month, 6 months, 12 months, however long the training period is.
Oh, yeah.
And, which I would rather, and that's the thing, like when I was, here in my department, I was like, I would rather be that guy than have someone have to be voluntold to do it,
right?
And then have a bad experience, right? And that no, and it's not going to help anybody, right? The person who's being voluntold to do it's going to hate it. They're going to hate everything about it. They're not going to do a really good job because they don't want to do it anyway. The person who they're training is going to hate it because this other person, I mean, the whole relationship's going to be off.
Yeah.
So I was put into that position quite a bit. And then as time goes on, when I was fire chief, I noticed that when I was having people go through the NFPA, the normal instructor 1 course, and then you have instructor 2, there's different levels. They were coming to the course, and I've taken the course. It's good. It gives you a good basis, but it lacks a lot of stuff. It lacks a lot of those the contexts, a lot of the little things about how you be an actual teacher, how you want to actually educate somebody and how to bring them forward. So, I knew that, and I knew that going in, because in fire and EMS, I think a lot of the times people take these courses to be an instructor, to try to check a box and like, well, I've got that certification now, great, well, that's all well and good, but can you apply the knowledge that you have, or did you actually get any knowledge from the course, right?
Yeah.
So I found that I needed to make something that was easy to read, that was full of stories, because I love telling stories, that was something that you could go back to over and over and over again, that you could be like, what was that? They want to talk about, didactic learning. What the heck was didactic learning? Or, Bloom's taxonomy. What is Bloom's taxonomy? Or, what all these different, educational word, the nomenclature that they use.
Stuff you learn in the class, but then, like you said, you know how to apply it.
Exactly. It's like, okay, well, if I would tell you, Jim, come up with 3 things from Bloom's taxonomy that you can do to bring up our probationary members, what are 3 concepts? And it's just like, well, I have to look that up.
Let me go Google it or ask AI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, which is not a bad thing. I mean, and that's the thing with, and I say that in the book, anytime someone tells you that you need to know everything or that you're an expert, they have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Because no one's an expert.
I'll
It's
tell you,
impossible.
I'll tell you, Mark, the
you
one
can't
thing,
know everything.
one thing I love about what you were talking about is how you were a teacher beforehand.
Yeah.
And this is something I've been kind of seeking out for this show, is finding people who have other talents that they got either while they became, an EMT, a paramedic, a firefighter, or they did something beforehand. Even Josh, right? Josh, you, before you became a paramedic, you were in the business world, right? Making like
Yeah.
what, $1 million a year or something like that.
No, it was slightly below Elon Musk, but we were
okay.
close. We were close.
Yeah, so
my
and
PJ
myself,
was
right,
always parked next to his.
I was in book publishing, medical book publishing, before I became an EMT. I've actually got a paramedic that I know. She's sings. She has her own album and all this stuff. I'm going to have her on, in June, and talk about her journey with that and what got her into, what it made her sort of focus on that stuff. So I love that because, like you said, it allowed you to sort of, put that element of teaching and stuff and write a book about it.
Yeah.
So that other experience that you had as a teacher, you carried it in. And like you said, even when you were, in the firehouse and whatnot, they were always, oh, well, Mark's a teacher. Let him teach this. Let him do this. Let him do that. Right.
Yep.
And I mean, that was me a lot of times too, with when I was doing the web design and stuff like that and social media stuff. I'd go in and they'd find out I was doing, hey, Jim, you want to take over the website? You want to take over the social media platform?
Yeah.
And that ends up happening.
It was more like, hey, Jim has some knowledge of this. Let's give it to him.
Let's let Jim do it so that we don't have to pay a lot of money to somebody else to come in here and do it.
Yeah.
I actually did a lot of teaching. I did teaching both in EMS and in the corporate world. And I found that the experience that I had and the training that I had in the corporate world, because we all know how well EMS and, the hospital systems and fire are funded. In the corporate world, I was actually able to get some really good training. And that enabled me to come in and understand how to deliver a topic. It didn't matter what the topic was. It always, obviously it always is a big plus if you know the topic before you teach it. But in the corporate world, that's not always, a possibility. Sometimes you just have to be a page ahead of the client. But you have to have that ability to frame out both what the subject is and why the subject is important to the audience. And if you can make that connection and then engage the audience, it's easy because they want to learn at that point. They go, hey, this is important to me. This is of interest to me. I want this information. And there's a whole dynamic shift and change. Unlike, and we've all had it where it's like hospital training or the required training, and you have to learn what the different departments do or something, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to prop my eyes open on this video call or take a still frame of me like, and then go away.
So, Mark, I want one thing. That's good. I'm glad Josh kind of brought that up, because one thing that you talk about in the book is knowing who your audience is, right? Knowing who your students are, especially when you talk about, I think with EMS, I feel it's a little unique in that way, where you get people that come in from, all different age groups, different financial situations. And like I mentioned, different life experiences, right? Who's been a teacher? I knew a guy who blew glass, he was a glass blower. He would create that type of stuff. I knew a guy who was an architect, all this type of stuff. And then they became EMTs and paramedics, And so I think that is, I think, key is knowing who it is that you're teaching. So when you talk about that in the book, Mark, do you kind of point out, some of those stories to kind of show people how to approach somebody that let's say is, maybe 30-something years old versus somebody who's just getting out of high school?
Yeah. And that's, that's drastically, and that's one thing, it's funny too, like all the, having, gone to school to be a teacher, right? All the courses to be in education, there's not a single course that teaches you how to teach. There's educational philosophy, there's educational psychology, there's, fundamentals of educational research, there's statistical methods, there's all these different things about the academic teaching aspect, right? The actual education, but there wasn't a single course that teaches you how to be a teacher. Not a single course. And a lot of that is left to your observation or your student teaching. And I talk about this in my book too. The day I started student teaching, I student taught at West Appear High School outside of Green Bay. And I taught 9th grade world history. That was the course. And my cooperating teacher was a lady by the name of Candy Heiderscheid. She was fantastic. She was, I think she was working on year 30, So I come in, I meet her. This is August. I'm actually also coaching football because I coached college football too when I was in college. So they're like, oh, Mark knows, he's going to do this too. I'm like, sure, absolutely. Yes, I will, So, so I'm coming in and she sits me down. She's like, okay, well, here's the book. This is the book we use. Come up with everything that you need to come up with. You're going to do all your own lesson plans. You're going to come up with all your own activities. You're going to come up with everything. You're not using any of my materials. I'm like, okay, all right, sure. She's like, either you can sink or you can swim. This is how you're doing it. And I'm like, okay, all right. The college tells you, no, what's going to happen is you're going to get there. You're going to observe your cooperating teacher for the first month. And then then month 2, you're going to take over 1 class. And then month 3, you're going to take over 2 classes, and there's a gradual stepping stone. She's like, nope, rip that Band-Aid off. Mark, either you can do this or you can't. And that's when
I wonder how, if that is beneficial for some people to kind of get thrown into something like that.
And that's, that goes back to, you got to know who your audience is, right?
Yeah.
She was of the mentality and from that generation where that's the way it was, right? Either you can do it or you can't. We're not gonna pretend, and I'm not gonna hold your hand, and I'm not gonna baby you. You're either gonna do this job or you're not gonna do the job.
Yeah.
And at that time, and with me, she kind of understood that, and she's like, nope, this is how it's gonna be. And I was fine with that because, my generation, that was understood. It's like, okay, you have someone, they're going to tell you what to do. You're going to shut up. You're going to do it, follow the orders, and you're going to go through, and you're going to try to do it the best of your ability, and that's it. You're going to suck up your punishment, and okay, yes, sir, thank you, yes, sir, yes, absolutely. Because
I remember when I first started in EMS, and I was volunteering, and then I got a job working on the 911 ambulance in New York City, and I didn't have a clue as far as how the work on the 911 started, and there was no FTO or riding as a third or anything. I got there, they handed me a radio with some other guy and said, don't kill anybody.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck to you.
Off you went, and I was terrified.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And nowadays, most places have gotten away from that, where they have more structured, in servicing and onboarding of new hires and stuff like that, and there's academies and all that type of. I know when I worked in North Carolina, it was like an 8-week, onboarding process.
Well, there's a reason for that, Jim. I mean there's a very distinct reason, because the old ideas of throwing you into the fire or throwing you into the lake and letting you sink or swim. Fundamentally don't work, and fundamentally the people who suffer is the student.
Yes.
And there was a point.
Yeah, you get people who either they're not learning the proper way to do things, or they're learning from a bad influence. I mean, I knew somebody who was brand new EMT. She started working with a really burnt out, ghetto type medic, and this guy burned her out, and she thought she was like a junior one of him, and then they ended up giving her a bad sort of reputation, even though she was a good provider. She knew what she was doing, but it was the attitude that ended up, kind of hurting her.
Right. And we've talked about that.
Thank God she's gone.
Yeah.
We've talked about that on this show,
Yeah.
the idea of, they mirror, they have the burnt out guy. The burnt out guy generally has a lot of workarounds, knows everybody, has been there for a while. Some people like
shortcuts on something. So, you have to just know the non-shortcuts.
Right, right. And that's, and in the same light, on the flip side, on the instructor side, how many times have we all three of us, everybody listening, has been to that course where the guy goes and in the first 30 seconds, you realize your coffee isn't strong enough. And you realize that no coffee will ever be strong enough. And although these guys come in and they tick off all the boxes and they have all the qualifications and theoretically can teach the subject, they have no skills in communicating.
Yes.
And we suffer for that too. So, and then there's the attrition in the field. I've been in 20 years and it was a revolving door.
Yeah.
So the idea that we can just take somebody and throw them into training and say, okay, now you can do this job is a fallacy. Like a lot of other things we build, our experiences on in EMS.
Yeah. It's funny. You talk about, being successful at being an instructor or being an FTO or somebody that can, kind of guide people and be a mentor. And I know in your book, you talk about that also, Mark, about how to be successful as a teacher.
Yeah.
And be successful as an instructor or even a leader.
Or at least
like you say, I think you say in the book that it's more than just a title, right? You have to kind of know how to get around it. Like Josh just said, it's not about just putting somebody with somebody and not or just giving yourself a title of being an instructor and then not knowing how to actually do it. Yeah. Right. And then at the same time instructing people, and then where you end up, kind of being almost a bad influence on the person, even if you're doing it unknowingly, because you're taking the shortcuts, you're doing the workaround because you've been doing it for, 5, 10, 15 years or whatnot. And you don't kind of pull back and go, wait a minute, I really should be kind of being a better example for this new person coming in.
Yeah. And that's where it goes to, I made the book. First, I did it after all those experiences and all the situations I was in. I had hurt my back and I had herniated my L4-5, moving a patient, of course, right? So when I was off on
not an uncommon story.
No, wait, who here has back injuries? Who here has back injuries for patients? Raise your head.
That's a whole different story, right? So always call for lifting assistance. Anyway, so when I was off, I was getting texts constantly, and different people were calling me that were newly assigned to be preceptors and FTOs, and how did you do this, or what what worked for this, and all these different questions. And I'm like, I should just write a book, because it's just like. Yeah, I could talk to you for hours and explain different things, and it's just like, why don't I have the time? I'm not supposed to be moving, so since I'm sitting here, immobile, I'm gonna go ahead. And so that's when I first wrote the first draft of the book, and actually I hurt my back again the following year after I got back, and that's when I finished writing the book. So it was one of those situations where I wanted to make that resource, I wanted to make that guide. To try to say, hey, here's all the stuff that I've learned as an educator for the last 24 years, right? Here it is. This is everything that I know in a nutshell. Not getting super deep into the weeds, because
which is important too. I think that you end up losing people, and a lot of books that I've read and I've seen out there that are kind of similar, talking about leadership and education, that they get too deep into the weeds,
Yeah.
and it's almost like
we get lost in translation.
Yeah,
you know, you could. I mean, I got books. You know, I've read tons. I mean, here actually, where is it? Here it is, right here. Right, this. Here's the old version. All right, this is the 7th edition of Fire Service Emergency Instructor. Right, hundreds and hundreds of pages filled with all kinds of great information,
pictures and everything.
I mean, it goes through the whole thing, and it's just like, well, okay, great. Now, what'd you learn? Right. And that's the kind of thing that I always took. You know, when I was a teacher, it's just like, okay, well, that's great. You tell me now, and this gets into that, you know, the taxonomy, those higher order thinking skills. You tell me what the situation is, right? Teach me what you know about IV starts. Tell me how you do an IV start. Tell me how you listen for lung sounds. You know, what's your method, right? Because we all do the same thing, right? I've seen your other videos talking about different, you know, getting your sample history, patient assessment, stuff like that. We all have this, you know, every doctor has the same way. And we all go through our certain routine. Every single person gets asked the same questions, you know, in the same manner, and we all do the same stuff over and over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with it. That's all repetition. That's all great things, because we will not forget, right? Over and over. Teaching's the same way. There's nothing wrong. And when we go into conversations, and when I want to, you know, instruct whole classes on, you know, what are the, you know, I'll do presentations on what's, you know, successful strategies to being a field training officer. And I'll go through all the different, you know, in my opinion, you know, 6 different steps, 7 different steps, 8 different steps. You can make however many steps you want of, you know, where I found success in doing these different activities. And it all comes down to, like you said, knowing how to teach, knowing who your audience is. Because if I'm talking to you, if, you know, Jim, if you and I are on the med together, right, and you're having with your experience, I'm coming from my experience, how I talk to you about certain things or how I relay information to you is going to be completely different than someone that's coming fresh out of school that has absolutely no experience. That's the audience factor, right? My presentation to you, or my presentation in July, I'm going to go talk at the Ohio Fire Chiefs conference. When I do that, my audience and the experience level is far different than when I go and teach actual probationary firefighters at my school, right? So you have to know who your audience is. And I think a lot of times when we get those, you know, I got to tape my eyes open, because the instructor doesn't take that into consideration, right? They're force feeding us, you know, information that this is my PowerPoint, this is what I do, and this is the information that I talk about. Okay, great. But, you know, give me a story, give me some context. Tell me about something that, why should I even, okay, we're going to talk about, you know, needle sticks, right? Let's make it interesting. Let's talk about bloodborne pathogen, you know, all these different things. You know, what, you know, the old way back, you know, I'll date myself. You took the needle, right? If you were doing a hypodermic needle, and you stuck it in the cushion of the med, and you held it there for a second, right? You didn't take the, you know, the side. It was before when they had self-retractables, right? I mean, you took, and you were supposed to, you know, cut up into the. I mean, it's just like, no, I'm just gonna stick it right here in the cushion of the pad, you know.
I'll get it later.
Yeah, I'll remember it later, you know, or whatever the situation is, or give it medications, right? I've drawn up the whole vial of, you know, Versed. I'm only gonna give half or whatever the situation is. I'm not going to draw up exactly what I'm going to give. I'm drawing the whole vial up. Right. So things have changed in the years that we've been doing things. But at the same time, if your audience doesn't understand or have that background information, they're not going to understand, and they're not going to get the connection to what you're trying to explain to them. You know, so knowing who your audience is huge, and that really deals a lot with the success of a teacher.
The one thing you hear a lot of people that complain. We talk about, you know, storytelling and stuff like that, but you do have people that complain that some instructors are too sort of wrapped up in telling war stories,
Yeah.
right? And not really teaching what has to be taught to the students. I mean, I had an instructor when I was in paramedic school. He never said anything about what was on the syllabus. I would go in there and just listen to war stories for 2
Yeah.
hours.
Let me tell you how awesome I am, right?
Yeah, and
Let me tell you the ability
to say, like you said, it's like telling stories is good, but you have to put it in the context of what it is you're trying to teach.
Yeah.
You know what I
So let
mean?
me ask you guys something. When you've sat there, and I just want to make a comment on the effectiveness of telling, of going on and telling these war stories. When you have a situation where you're instructing, as an example, Mark, where the example you just said, where I'm not going to draw the whole vial. But, some people draw the whole vial up or something like that.
Yeah.
And, you could say where, hey, I needed more. And then at this point in time, I had no more to go to because the rest was wasted. But on another end of that, when we teach, there's an aspect of believability that we have to convey, because otherwise the lesson is just going to be rejected.
Yeah.
When you tell war stories and tell these war stories either repeatedly or embellish because, people have heard them before, it becomes less believable. Now, everything is less believable. So at a point, even a short point in, these war stories are counterproductive.
Yeah.
Is that something you found?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. It's all context, right? We can, we've all been in EMS for 20 plus years, right? So we've all got, between all three of us, we've got 60 plus years of EMS calls. I know, right? Good Lord, and think of the thousands of patients and the thousands of things that we've done, and we could tell stories, war stories, right? And, this worked and that worked. And hey, I cardio, I got this guy to, convert from doing a vagal maneuver, all these different things. I mean, yeah, we could talk about that till the cows come home. But at the same time, when it comes to education, a story should only be long enough and short enough to understand, to remember, and to give context to what the situation you're trying to explain. So, in my book, I talk about, the different level, or what I found, what makes a good story. And I've run into many students who they remember the stories more than the lesson itself. But if the story teaches what the education was, it's a success.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between telling a war story, right, and trying to look at all the medals on my chest and let me tell you how humble I am. There's a difference between those stories, and there's a difference between let me tell you about how I almost died.
Yeah.
And that tells the lesson, and that gives you the example and the context to, okay, Mark told us about how they were going through a situation. We were, whatever the situation is, he almost died. This is the lesson he learned. I remember that story, and the moral of the story, or the educational aspect of the story, was check your surroundings, make sure that you look, you have situational awareness, and if you need backup, call for backup. So if those are the points I want you to learn from my story, that's the important takeaway. Telling a story just for the fact of, bravado and showing, oh, I've been doing this for 30 years. That's great. But you know what? You could have been doing it wrong for 30 years. Right. And I think a lot of the instructors
that's great, but you know what? You could have been
where, they tell these war stories to try to give credence to their, their reputation or to their title that they may have. I think a lot of us are like, okay, well, that's great. Fantastic, but tell me something that you learned, like what did you learn from that experience? What am I supposed to get from that? It's great that you did those things, fantastic, but give me something more than that.
Yeah.
There's got to be there's a method to that madness. So you're right. It's not just telling war stories. There's got to be a reason for the story itself.
Yeah. And so I guess it's important for instructors, when they are setting up their lesson, is to think about, like you said, a story that applies to what they're teaching and how it can, relate to it, rather than just getting up there and start teaching. And then in your mind, you think, oh, yeah, I that reminds me of a story. And then you start telling it and you're way off track of what it is you're trying to teach.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, it doesn't have to be your story.
Right. Yeah, that's true, too.
I think a lot of people are like, because I've had that conversation. A number of people, like when I start the book out, I start the book telling a story about when my partner and I went to a frequent flyer that we had, and yada yada yada, and there was a snake, there was all kinds of stuff that was going on, and that's how I start the book, is with telling a story. Mm-hmm. And then I go into talking about telling stories and how important they are. And everybody who's read the book, there have been many people that have come to me and said, well, what happened to the snake? Tell me what happened to the snake. Right. Whatever happened? And it's funny because it's true, because I don't say in the book what happened to the snake, but 5 years later, let me tell you, there was a skeleton of a snake in an aquarium in the same guy's apartment. So the snake lived for a while, and then he ended up not doing so well. So it's funny, but that's what people remember. That's, they'll go through, and that's, the power of storytelling is those kind of things, right? Yeah. They remember the aspects, they remember those things. Hopefully they learn the lesson, about whatever the situation was, and they bring that back, and that's what they'll stick in. And like I said, it doesn't have to be your story. I tell stories when I'm teaching about other people all the time. When I was teaching social studies, I didn't live through the Civil War. I didn't live through World War II. I didn't, all these different things that we talked about, I tell other people's stories. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, No,
absolutely not.
As long as it gives context, and as long as it gives a lesson that you want the student to come away with. That's the
let me ask you before we wrap it up. I'll tell you that I love the title of the book, because it's the type of title, and this is something that I kind of help some small businesses with. This stuff is to stop the scroll, right? Yeah. People are on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, and they're just scrolling, and then you see a book that says, 2 Dark 30. Like, what the hell is this? Yeah. Right? And you almost have to go to the website and find out what it is. Even if you don't buy the book, it almost makes you go there to see what it's all about. So yeah. I want to ask you, like, what made you come up with that title? What was the story behind that?
Well, the story behind that is as you guys can understand, when does the proverbial shit hit the fan, right? 2:30 in the morning, when bar time closes here in Wisconsin anyway. 2 o'clock's bar time, so that's when she cuts off. 2 a.m. right? So there's that half hour between, okay, someone's trying to stumble home, or what's going on, and everything always happens. For me, at least, anyway, everything really bad when I was RSIing people, when I was, trying to do other things. There's a fire with someone hanging out the window, multiple vehicles, all this different, all the worst case scenarios, they always end up happening at that witching hour, which was, in my opinion.
No, I'll agree with that. I've had many calls at like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the thing. Like, so I took the, our quasi paramilitary aspect, right? So dark, in military terms, just meaning, after midnight. So 2 Dark 30, 2:30 in the morning. So, I try to do that with my teaching. Like, okay, great. We all know how to do all these different concepts, but can you do it in the middle of the night when you are groggy, you've been running around, you've been, this is your 12th call for the day, or, you haven't gone to sleep at all, or, whatever the scenario is, however tired you are, can you function at 2 Dark 30?
Right.
Can you successfully not get yourself, your partner, or your patient, or whatever the situation is? Can you successfully work in that environment at 2:30 in the morning when literally everything's hitting the fan?
Yeah. So where can people get the book? Is it just on your website at
You can get it
2dark30.com?
from my website. The website obviously is just what it is, 2dark30, written out the number 2. That was another thing. My wife and I was going back and forth when I told her, like, what how about this title? How about this? And she's like, no, it needs to be just written. Don't do the number 2. So it's 2dark30.com. Also, Amazon has it. It's on Amazon. Yep. There's the book. It's on Barnes and Noble. You can get it everywhere. It's ebook. I just released the audiobook. A lot of people were.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah, they were all over me for like, you got to do the audiobook. When are you going to do the audiobook?
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, yeah, that was a whole nother process, And they're like, well, you got to do it though. You have to say it. Don't hire someone else to do.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I was lucky. I did my little differential diagnosis book, but it's all kind of just factual stuff.
Sure.
No one wants to hear me drone on about that. So I paid somebody
I
paid somebody to go ahead and do that.
No one wants to listen to me talk about education.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you have to do it because the stories I have in there, you have to, you talk with your.
And I'll tell you, Mark, they're right, because there's a lot. I listen to audiobooks all the time. And some people, when I get the book, if it's not them reading it, I'm super disappointed.
Yeah.
I'm like, who's this talking?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Some hired British actor that, whatever I could have.
Like, no, I want to hear the guy that the story's about,
Yeah. So I did release the audiobook. The audiobook's out there. It's on Audible. You can get it on Amazon, iTunes, stuff like that. Ebook is available as well. It's every format. And then I did I made a workbook because I love teaching. So there is an accompanying workbook that you can get with the book itself that gets you through. It's a little more. It goes chapter by chapter and goes more into the educational aspect of like, okay, let's set up a lesson plan. Let's set up some higher order thinking skill questions. Let's set up organization of how you would structure your curriculum or, all those different aspects from the book itself. So it's a companion.
I think people should go check it out. I'll put links to your website in the show notes so people can just click on that to go check it out. And like you said, it's there's no excuse to get it. You don't want to order a book and have it shipped to you. Just get it on your phone. Get an ebook version of it. Get the audio version version of it. I always tell people there's always something to learn.
Absolutely.
In EMS and sometimes you might have people might have heard this. Oh, I've heard about you have to know who your students are and I understand that, but maybe this is the one chapter in the book that you can read or listen to and come away with a different perspective of it. I always tell people that with continuing education. Oh, I don't want to go to a stroke CME. I've heard that CME 1,000 times about stroke. Yeah. I'm always like, but maybe this is the one. And when you do, where there's a little golden nugget that the instructor says that really hits home for you and you remember it throughout your career. Maybe it's a meme you looked at, an image or an infographic you look at, and that helps you remember something forever, or even just kind of clicks in your head and helps you, or recall it, So there's always, new stuff to learn, but it's always great to kind of review what you've heard before.
Yeah. And that's the case too. Like it's, people are always like, well, is this just for people that want to be teachers? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. Because anyone who's a leader, right? If you're quote unquote a leader, if you're an officer, if you're, you're always expected to teach, no matter what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're the preceptor, you're the FTO, you're assigned to be the teacher to that person. Obviously, that would be, an obvious thing for you to look at.
Even think about how many times you're a paramedic and you're the only medic on the scene of a bad call. Guess what? Suddenly you're the leader.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking to you. Right? Yeah, everyone's looking to you to know what to do and tell them what to do and guide them and, to take care of their patient, to get off the scene, to get to the hospital, all that stuff. They're looking at you as the highest medical authority that's there to do that. So even if you're not a lieutenant, you're not an FTO, you're not an instructor or whatever, you're going to find yourself in those leadership roles, even if it's for that one call.
Yeah.
And
I've
so
had a lot of
to know about it.
Yep, and there's been people who've reached out to me through like LinkedIn and different things like that they're not even in EMS or fire. They're emergency management people, or they're in law enforcement, or there's people that are just in business that are like, man, I wish I would have had something like this before I was the regional director. My father-in-law read the book prior, before I released it, just to get another person to read some, look at this for me, make sure this sounds right. And he was an engineer. He was a civil engineer and used to be the city water development coordinator, nothing to do with fire EMS, nothing like that. And he's like, man, I wish I would have had a book like this before I took over that, supervisor role. And it's because that's what happens, right? We're put into those situations where even though we may not be technically and quote unquote the teacher, the instructor, you're expected to know how to relay information, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to the communication aspect.
Yeah, think about a lot of these people that are out there that were in the military. The extreme ownership from Jocko Wilnick. He's a Navy SEAL, but he's teaching corporations.
Killing warfare tactics, right? It's just like, what can we glean from this? Right?
Yeah, I'm going to build a whole company on leadership based on what I knew from the SEALs. I'm going to apply it to, business. Yeah. So it does apply, like you said. It doesn't. You don't have to necessarily be an EMT or a paramedic or whatever to get some benefit, from a book like this. So, all right, Mark, I'm going to end it there, man. Thanks so much for joining me today, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk with you guys.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Josh, anything you want to say before we head out?
No, it's every time a educator who has experience shares their experience, I think that we all benefit from it. So I appreciate you doing this, and looking forward to seeing it.
Absolutely. So, guys, don't forget, go to 2dark30.com. You can get all the different versions of the book.
Every version is available. Yeah.
Right. They're all sitting there. So go there, check it out. He's even got a few, you got a couple of excerpts there, right, too? People can read.
I do. Yeah, I've got the excerpt from the first chapter is on there. I break down.
So go check that out. I think you got about, maybe 10, 15 pages there, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So go check that out. This way, before you even buy it or whatever, download it. You can always read it and see if it's something that you want to really sink your teeth into.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. Oh, by the way, guys, I'm not doing it just yet, but next week, of course, is the amazing EMS week. And
Nurses Week.
Yeah.
Nurses Week.
Nurses, doctors, dispatchers,
nurses, doctors, doctor helpers, and
that's not an ambulance, but
driver,
registration clerks. They're all going to be part of EMS week next week, but I will have a free download for everybody next week that I'm trying to finish up right now that I think people are going to really like to help them sort of review and stuff. So keep an eye out for that, guys. And of course, if you're on my email list, I'll send you an email, let you know where you can download it. All right.
And I am giving no discount over my wrenches at all, over respect for everybody. There's zero discount. So come and get your wrenches at this fantastic new price of $0 off.
Right. Exactly. No discount on the wrenches.
No discount. You know what? EMS is a tough profession. Learn to live with it.
Right. All right, guys, that's it for us. As always, I am Jim Hoffman.
Josh Knapp.
Stay safe, everybody.